We spend like a massive amount of time in our culture talking about the voices all around us. The critics, the cheerleaders, the just endless stream of opinions pouring out of our screens every single waking moment. It's honestly like standing in the middle of a packed, chaotic stadium, and every person in the crowd is holding a megaphone, just shouting their perspective directly at you.
Yeah, it can be completely deafening. I mean, the sheer volume of it forces you to constantly react to your environment rather than actually taking a second to think about your place within it.
Right, exactly. But what happens when that stadium finally empties out? When the crowd goes home, the screens go dark, and it is just you sitting completely alone in a quiet room, staring down a massive, seemingly impossible task. There's an entirely different voice that takes over in that moment, a much quieter one.
And that's the one that really matters, honestly.
It is, because that solitary inner whisper dictates whether you stand up and actually attempt the task or whether you just quietly walk away before you even begin.
Yeah.
So today we are doing a deep dive into a really fascinating source document. It's titled Trusting Yourself, Trusting God, The Spirituality of Self-Efficacy. And it does something highly unusual.
Very unusual, yeah. It takes the modern clinical psychological framework of Albert Bandura and bridges it directly with the classic Catholic theology of Thomas Aquinas.
Which is just a wild pairing, right?
It's a very unexpected collision of worlds. We're looking at human effort, raw psychological agency on one side and then spiritual grace on the other. And the text attempts to show how they aren't opposed at all, but actually deeply depend on one another.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if we want to understand how trusting yourself connects to, trusting a divine framework, we first have to look at what is actually happening in the brain when we face that impossible task in that quiet room. And Bandura doesn't just casually call this inner voice confidence, right?
Yeah.
He uses the formal term self-efficacy.
Right, self-efficacy. And he defines it specifically as our belief in our ability to influence events in our lives.
To influence events.
Yeah, the crucial word in his definition is influence. I mean, self-efficacy is strictly operational. It's an internal assessment of agency. So in a fraction of a second, your brain calculates this fundamental equation.
Like a literal math problem.
Exactly like that.
Yeah.
It asks, if I exert effort here, will it actually alter the outcome of this event?
See, I think we often casually swap the terms self-efficacy and self-esteem in everyday conversation. But if we're dealing with an informed psychological framework, the difference is massive. It's not, is self-esteem like looking in a mirror and feeling a warm glow about who you are? Whereas self-efficacy is more like looking at a heavy weight and just knowing your muscles can lift it.
That's a great analogy, yeah. They are entirely distinct mechanisms. Self-esteem is an effective evaluation, is how much you value yourself in a general sense.
Right, like an overall vibe.
Exactly. But you can have incredibly high self-esteem and still have absolute zero self-efficacy when asked to, say, land a commercial airplane or perform open-heart surgery.
Oh, for sure. Please do not ask me to perform open-heart surgery.
Right, because self-efficacy is task-specific. It is a predictive model your brain runs to determine if your specific skills can manipulate a specific environment.
So if your brain runs that predictive model, looks at the environment, and the result comes back negative, or, well, negative meaning you don't even try, you just walk away. Your behavior is literally dictated before the action even begins.
And the really important thing here is that predictive model isn't static. You aren't born with a fixed baseline of self-efficacy that you are just stuck with for the rest of your life.
You can actually change it.
You absolutely can. Bandura mapped out exactly how the brain gathers data to build and update that belief over time. He isolated 4 distinct sources, and he starts with the rawest, most undeniable data point our brain relies on, which is actual physical mastery.
Okay, so to feed the brain the data it needs, we have to talk about these mastery experiences, actually getting out there and doing the hard thing. But there's like a caveat in the source material regarding this that really caught my attention.
Oh, about the easy wins.
Yes. It states that an easy win, like succeeding on the very first try without any real friction, actually builds a very fragile, brittle kind of belief. The brain literally needs to experience struggle first. Why is that? Shouldn't winning just feel like winning?
You would think so, but it comes down to what the brain is actually learning from the event. If you attempt a complex task and you succeed effortlessly, your brain concludes, oh, I survived because the environment was safe and easy.
Oh, wow. So it credits the environment, not its own internal agency.
Yes. The brain assumes safety is an external condition.
Yeah.
So the moment you finally encounter a hostile or difficult environment, the brain just panics.
Yeah.
It has absolutely no data proving it can handle friction.
Right. Never had to lift the heavy weight before.
Exactly. But when you attempt something and you fail, and then you adjust your strategy, you strain and eventually succeed, you are feeding your brain an entirely different data set. You are proving that initial failure is not a terminal state.
You are basically teaching the brain, hey, I am safe, not because the environment is easy, but because I have the capacity to manipulate a hostile environment.
And that is the core neurological mechanism of resilience. The struggle is the active ingredient. It recalibrates the brain's predictive model to factor in persistence.
So the brain learns to expect the friction.
Yes, and to trust its ability to push through it. So the next time you face a challenge, the brain looks back at that struggle and says, well, we have manipulated hostile variables before. We could totally do it again.
Okay, so we're putting reps in the sandbox of action. We have to get our hands dirty to give the brain undeniable proof. But obviously, we can't physically master every single scenario life throws at us. We don't have the time, the resources, or the energy for that.
No, of course not.
So what happens when we're facing a crisis or a challenge we've never experienced before?
That is where the brain shifts from direct action to observation. Bandura called this second source vicarious experiences.
We are hypersocial creatures, and our brains are constantly running simulations based on the outcomes of the people around us.
It's like silent modeling. We watch someone else navigate the friction, and we say to ourselves, well, if they can, maybe I can too. But let me stop you there, because the text adds a very strict limitation to this concept.
The similarity factor.
Yeah, it says this vicarious hope only grows when we witness people with similar circumstances to us facing similar challenges. Why does that matter? Like, if I'm trying to build ultimate belief in my own physical or mental capacity, shouldn't I just watch an Olympic gold medalist or study the biography of a billionaire? Why does the model have to look like me?
What's fascinating here is how ruthlessly efficient the brain is at rejecting invalid data. When you watch an Olympic athlete or a billionaire CEO succeed, your brain does not run a simulation of you doing that.
It just writes them off. It immediately categorizes them as outliers. It just assumes they're operating under entirely different laws of physics.
Right. It instantly calculates the gap in resources. Like,
Okay.
oh, they have a private chef and unlimited money, so of course they can do that. I can't.
Exactly. If the gap between your starting line and their starting line is too wide, the brain just refuses to adopt the belief. The relatability of the model is the actual engine that makes vicarious self-efficacy work.
Okay, that makes so much sense.
Right. So when you see someone from your own neighborhood or someone with your exact same educational background and limitations overcome a massive obstacle, the brain's rejection filter is bypassed.
Because the variables match.
The variables match, the brain goes, wait a minute, their constraints match our constraints.
Yeah.
If their effort altered the outcome, then our effort can alter the outcome.
It proves the physics of the situation are actually possible for you. It makes this hypothetical thing incredibly concrete.
And suddenly, just through observation, someone else's mastery experience becomes a deposit into your own self-efficacy account.
That is amazing. Okay, so if physical failure builds our baseline and watching relatable peers scales it, what happens when we are just completely isolated? Like when we are paralyzed, we haven't taken any action yet, and there is no one around to observe. We're just sitting there staring at the impossible task.
Yeah.
That brings in Bandura's third source, which relies entirely on the input of others, right? Social persuasion.
Yeah. When we are paralyzed by a lack of internal belief, a credible external voice can serve as a temporary bridge. The text focuses heavily on the impact of mentors, trusted colleagues, or a strong community looking at you and saying, hey, I have assessed this situation and you have what it takes.
But there is a vital distinction here between actual social persuasion and just like empty cheerleading. Because if someone just constantly tells me I'm amazing at everything, regardless of the reality of the situation, eventually I just tune them out. Their words lose all their weight.
Oh, completely. The mechanism requires credibility above all else. I mean, empty flattery doesn't alter the brain's predictive model because the brain knows the person hasn't accurately assessed the risk.
The brain is too smart for that.
Exactly. For social persuasion to really work, the voice has to come from someone who understands the severe difficulty of the task, sees your specific flaws, and still bets on your capacity.
It's almost like they are loaning you their belief in your agency until your own belief can catch up.
A loaned belief. That's a really profound way to conceptualize it. That external persuasion provides just enough psychological momentum to initiate the attempt. And once you initiate the attempt,
You enter the realm of mastery experiences,
exactly, the sources are not isolated at all. They constantly feed into one another.
which brings us to the final piece of this psychological puzzle. The brain is gathering data from action, from observation, and from trusted voices. But it is also gathering a massive, continuous stream of data from our own biology. The fourth source is our physiological and emotional states.
Right, so your nervous system is continuously interpreting bodily signals. Tension, heart rate, fatigue. It uses all that to assess your readiness for a challenge.
This is where I want to dive really deep into the mechanism, because the text talks about reinterpreting difficult feelings. And a lot of times we hear that as this very soft, almost cliche self-help advice. Just think positive when you get nervous. But mechanistically, something much more concrete is happening here. Think about the dashboard of a car.
Okay, I like this.
If a massive flashing red light suddenly turns on, your immediate interpretation is, oh no, the engine is failing. I need to pull over and shut the car down immediately. But what if you open the manual and you realize that specific red light actually means turbo thrusters are fully engaged and ready for deployment?
Well, the raw data coming from the car hasn't changed at all. I mean, the red light is still flashing.
The raw data is identical. The racing heart, the tight stomach, the burst of adrenaline, the raw physiological data is the exact same whether you are terrified or thrilled. It's the manual you use to read the dashboard that dictates your behavior.
Yes. That is the clinical mechanism of cognitive reappraisal. If you interpret your racing heart as a sign of critical failure, your brain assumes the environment is overwhelming and it just tanks your self-efficacy. You shut down.
Right.
But if you reinterpret those exact same physical sensations, like if you tell yourself, my nervous system is dumping adrenaline into my bloodstream to give me the sharp focus and physical vitality required to solve this problem, you neutralize the threat entirely. You recategorize the physical response as an asset.
And the document actually uses the word kindness here, treating our physical anxiety with kindness.
Yeah.
Which feels, I don't know, kind of out of place in a rigorous clinical setting until you actually understand the mechanism.
How so?
Well, if you aggressively judge your own fatigue, like I'm so weak, I shouldn't be this tired, you are layering psychological stress on top of physical depletion. You're basically accelerating the engine failure.
That's a brilliant way to put it. Kindness, in this context, is an operational tool. By calmly acknowledging your physiological state, saying, I am exhausted because I have been exerting immense effort, and it is okay that my muscles are shaking right now, you prevent the brain from coding that fatigue as a fatal error.
You maintain your agency.
Exactly. You maintain it by refusing to interpret discomfort as defeat.
Okay, so we have mapped the full architecture here. Mastery, vicarious observation, credible persuasion, and physiological reappraisal. This is a brilliant, thoroughly modern, scientifically backed blueprint for human self-reliance. But here's where it gets really interesting.
Here comes the pivot.
Yes.
Yes.
Because how does this intensely psychological, self-driven framework fit into a classic theological worldview? Looking at this from the outside, the traditional spiritual narrative seems to emphasize surrendering your agency. It's about trusting God, not trusting yourself.
And that perceived tension is exactly what the source document seeks to resolve. To do that, it pulls from the classic Catholic theological tradition, specifically rooting the discussion in the works of St. Thomas Aquinas. The text references his writings on the celestial hierarchy, dealing with the concept of the human race moving from grace to glory.
And the anchor point, the central phrase the text pulls from this tradition to bridge the gap, is grace perfects, not replaces our nature. That is a dense, philosophically loaded statement. Let's unpack the mechanics of that intersection.
Right, so in this specific theological framework, nature refers to our inherent human capacities. Our intellect, our will, our psychological resilience. The argument is that divine grace does not enter the picture to bypass or erase those capacities.
So God doesn't demand that you become an empty, passive puppet with zero psychological agency. But wait, let me push back on that, because I think it's where a lot of people really get stuck. Doesn't trusting yourself intrinsically compete with trusting the divine? Like, if I'm spending years building up my own psychological muscle, mastering hostile environments, observing peers, and rereading my internal dashboard to rely on my own turbo thrusters, aren't I just proving I don't need grace? It feels like a zero-sum game. The more self-efficacy I have, the less room there is for faith.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it only looks like a zero-sum game if you view human nature and divine grace as opposing forces competing for space. The text argues they are deeply collaborative. In Aquinas' view, human effort, your psychology, your nature, is the actual raw material that grace acts upon.
The raw material.
Yes, learning to trust and develop the capacities you have been given is an expression of trusting the giver of those capacities.
So building self-efficacy isn't an arrogant act of separation.
Not at all. The document reframes self-efficacy as a psychospiritual practice. When you wade into the friction of a mastery experience, when you endure failure and adapt, you are actively shaping your mind and body. You are refining the vessel. The stronger and more resilient your nature becomes through these psychological mechanisms, the more capable a conduit you are for grace to perfect and utilize in the world.
Wow. That completely flips the paradigm.
Yeah.
It means doing good psychology is, in a way, doing good theology. When you listen to a credible mentor who loans you their belief, or when you reinterpret your physical anxiety with kindness to keep moving forward, you aren't pushing the divine away. You are actually preparing yourself. You're building the capacity to respond faithfully to whatever reality demands of you.
They are the same track, simply viewed through two different lenses. Psychology explains the structural mechanics of human agency, and theology provides the ultimate purpose and direction for that agency.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner, listening right now? The next time you find yourself staring down that massive, impossible task in that quiet room, remember that the inner voice calculating your odds is not a permanent fixture. It is highly malleable.
You have the agency to alter it. I mean, you can build your baseline by intentionally seeking out difficult struggles to prove to your brain that you can manipulate a hostile environment. You can scale that belief by finding relatable peers and observing their persistence.
You can borrow momentum from credible voices who know your flaws, but still bet on your capacity.
And you can change the manual you use to read your own physiological dashboard.
And fundamentally, whether you view this challenge through the clinical lens of Albert Bandura or the profound spiritual lens of Thomas Aquinas, the friction you are experiencing isn't a glitch in the system. The struggle is the entire point. It is the forge where your capacity is built. Which brings us back to that quiet, solitary room we talked about at the very beginning. I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. The document spends a lot of time on reinterpreting our internal signals. Think about the next time you face a massive hurdle and that immediate suffocating wave of severe self-doubt hits you.
It is an inevitable feeling. It happens to literally everyone.
It does. But what if you don't view that severe self-doubt as a lack of faith? What if you don't view it as a fatal flaw in your psychological programming? What if you choose to reinterpret that exact moment of intense, isolating doubt as the necessary, beautiful starting line? The precise moment where both your human persistence and spiritual grace are about to begin their absolute best work.